today what we're going to talk about is Fraud Observer. And so Fraud Observer, we're going to go a little bit through what it is. We'll talk about how you set it up, what that would look like in terms of implementing that on your system. And we'll talk through a couple of dashboards and then how you can create incidents based upon Fraud Observer and some reports based upon Fraud Observer. And so really, let's do a level set real quick in terms of, I know we get a lot of different levels of skill set on this call. So this may be a quick review for some of you and it may be new for some of you, but what I like to do is go through really what analytics is real quick, where it fits and how it plays, and then we'll kind of jump into Fraud Observer itself. So Ribbon Analytics is a very highly scalable analytics system, big data analytics. It uses Hadoop database and Postgres for processing. It runs in multi-node clusters on Kubernetes and can run on VMware, KVM, can run in AWS, as you know, guys probably know. But basically what it's doing is we have the concept, the big takeaway here is we have the concept of sensor and enforcer. And so a sensor is an element in the network, such as our core SBC, which is really what we have in our lab demo today. But a core SBC or other device in the network that's providing data feeds to the analytics system. And so things of like, for instance, with the SBC, things like CDRs, you've got your performance statistics that can be fed up to it, as well as PDU information in the form of like level 4 trace, so we can do things like ladder diagrams. So that's the sensor. We also have the ability to have in the network an enforcer, and an enforcer can be is something that can take action or mitigation against an anomaly that's detected by the system. So it can either be manually mitigated. So for instance, let's say you detect fraud or you detect something going on in the network, a bad actor, you can manually mitigate that and block that calling number, for instance. Or you can have the system you can even take it to the level of having it automatically block that number for permanently for a period of time, so on and so forth. But again, quick review of what analytics is, very high level. That's probably the 60,000 foot view. But we do have the ability to ingest data from multiple different elements, not only within the Sonos portfolio or Ribbon portfolio. Sorry, I'm an old Sonos guy. The Ribbon portfolio, as well as third-party elements in your network. So let's talk about the data pipeline a little bit with analytics. So we already mentioned the concept of a sensor feeding data into analytics. So the data is pulled or streamed from that device, and then we can do things such as data enrichments. And so data enrichment is where we can take CDRs, for instance. We can take the CDRs and add additional data that's not part of that raw CDR coming in into the database and store that with the record. So for instance, things like, just an example of latitude, longitude, the customer's username, city, state, that kind of thing. Anything, there's multiple fields that can be stored with that, but it's a way to enrich the data so that it's useful for your particular network and maybe your particular use cases. We also do that with some things around our Fraud Observer. It uses data enrichment in the examples as well, but the data is enriched after it's collected. Then that data is run through aggregation, and so we have KPIs that run against that data on a periodic basis, and it's taking that data and scrubbing that data and building up data sets, if you will, or building up tables in the database that you can then go and do analysis on, build dashboards against, and things of that nature. And that is the way that Fraud Observer really runs. We have our legacy fraud applications, and as you guys know, if you're using this, you have to put it through a training period, and it needs to kind of look and learn normals in your network. Fraud Observer really doesn't do that. Fraud Observer is taking KPI data, doing some analysis on it, determining, okay, what are the busiest numbers, for instance, which we'll show you examples of, showing you calls to potentially high fraud countries, and things where you can, quickly pattern and look for anomalies in the network. Um, Talking about the pipeline again, after the data is aggregated, it then again goes to that analysis phase that we were just kind of talking about. Then on top of that, you have the ability to do alerts and reports, and like I mentioned, the enforcer, you have the ability, if you want to take it that far, is to push policies into your network to take some action against some activity within the network itself. Okay, let's talk about um, let's talk about a little bit about unusual calling patterns. So again, in telecom, there's a lot of different. When you say fraud, this can mean a lot of different things. But let's kind of focus down a little bit to what's kind of going on here. So things like high volumes of calls from a calling number could indicate things like robocalling or TDOS, telephony denial of service, that's attempting to come in your network and flood that with nuisance calls or resource depleting calls within the system or within your network infrastructure. We have high volumes of short durations calls. They could be things like Wangiri scheme, which is luring your customers to try to initiate calls back to premium cost, high cost numbers or countries. And then lastly, we've got another example is, high calls to revenue calls or high volumes of calls to high revenue countries or foreign countries. So this is what we've known as the IRSF, or the International Revenue Sharing Fraud Scheme, which we'll show you some charts and examples of that in the dashboards here very shortly as well. Okay, what is Fraud Observer? We already touched a little bit, but Fraud Observer is an application that's running on our Ribbon Analytics system that uses basically exploratory data analysis, or EDA as we call it, to look for and provide insights or examples of unusual or suspicious calling patterns. The system basically provides information on those calling patterns with emphasis around the outliers. And call number pairings, if you will. Then you can actually take this and you can raise incidents and alerts and build reports against that. I did actually put a link to the Fraud Observer documentation, which I'll point out here very shortly. The documentation around Fraud Observer is very good, and it's going to cover most of the stuff that we go through today. In the examples, screenshots and dashboards and things that we show on the live system, we'll cover most of that as well. But I did put that in there. That's kind of a handy link for you guys. And then, what is an incident? Really, another quick review. What is an incident? Well, an incident is when the system has ingested data into Ribbon Analytics, and you've gone through aggregation of that data, and the system's defined or detected something that that exceeds a threshold, if you will. And we'll go show you how to set up an incident detector on some of the data as we go through this. But it's a way to flag and raise an alert or raise concern for a particular system anomaly that's been detected. And so ultimately, then you have the decision. You can raise an alert, you can send an incident report, so on and so forth. You can wake people up on their pagers or text messages or whatever. You can tell I'm old school telecom guy with pagers, but on their devices. So let's talk about what this actually entails. So looking over at the documentation, our Fraud Observer application. So really what we have to do is we need to enable this on the system. Let's go back to the beginning page here. We got to go enable it. And so in order to enable this, let's actually jump into the system itself. There's an add-on that you guys are probably familiar with add-ons if you spend any time around analytics. Add-ons are additional applications and things that you can add into the system that may or may not be enabled by default. And so the add-on that you're going to want to enable is, I'm just going to look for fraud, is Fraud Base and Fraud Observer. Fraud Observer, and I believe just from I was installing this the other day, this may not be in the system by default, and you may need to go do the software download request to get the the actual file off of our support portal. But once you have that and have that installed, you load and you enable or deploy the add-on, and it's going to deploy a lot of data sources and a lot of seeded dashboards for you by default. And so you can see it's going to go in and build all of these various data sources as well as these dashboards. And we're going to focus primarily on the calling numbers, some of the calling number dashboards today in this. But once you have that enabled, once you have this system enabled or have this add-on enabled in your system, we're going to go back here, and you should see under the applications drop down, you should now see Fraud Observer listed underneath there. And when you come under the Fraud Observer application, you're going to by default see a couple of different applications listed. We're going to focus on calling number today. And as you can see, what it's going to show you is there's a couple of dashboards that it's going to talk about here. And it's going to show you, this is just again looking at that document link that I sent you, it's going to show you these two charts. And the first chart's going to show you the top 100 numbers in the category of assigned to weight. And it's going to show you the weekly numbers in each category. So if we come back over to this, you can see, okay, this number here is bubbled up to the top here, and it's showing the highest numbers. This number is calling the highest volume of international calls. It also has a very high number of minutes of use and peak calls by minute. So using our CDR viewer, you could then go in and drill into looking at this particular incident. And I've got one here just for the interest of time. We saved this, where we search the CDRs for calling number normalized equal to that number. And then you can actually see the CDRs that are coming up with this. You can go in here and you can look at the actually decoded CDR, which this may be reviewed for a lot of you guys, but you can look at the decoded CDR. So rather than having to look at the CSV fields and know that the fifth field stands for whatever value that is, it will actually decode this. You can also get the ladder diagram, as we've shown you in the past, by clicking the ladder, and then you can expand and look at the various SIP messages, ingress and egress of the SBC in this case. And then you can do things, all the normal things here, like you can export that to PCAP, HTML, what have you. But that's kind of a quick rundown of what we're doing here. Another one that I wanted to show you is the busiest calling numbers. And the busiest calling numbers is very handy to kind of keep an eye on what's going on the system. So again, you can see the types of calling numbers that are broken out, as well as what type of records they're generating. So we can see, we've got a lot of calls coming from this number with stop records, but we've got a lot of attempts going on. So why are we getting 28,000 attempts from these particular numbers? You can also see over here we've got quite a few calls coming in per minute on that number. The short duration calls is useful for things like when Gary calls, could indicate problem in the network if callers are calling and not able to get through. But we don't have any of that going on here. And then, of course, we've got the distinct call numbers, another indication of a potential problem. And I'm kind of breezing through this, guys. Just really kind of wanted to show you what's there so that you can go and add this add-on in your network. Again, if you've got FraudProtect already, the license for your system, you can add Fraud Observer just by deploying the add-on. Let's look at the number analysis here. So looking at the number analysis to detect potential revenue sharing fraud. So you can see that, we've got calls to these countries over time. These are the calling numbers by volume to international countries. And then we've got the, top 15 calling numbers by minutes of use to international countries. We don't have any calls showing to high fraud countries, which is, is good for us. But one of the things you can do here is people may say, well, what's on the high call fraud country list and how do I change that? Well, there's a couple of things you'd want to look at is under our data manager, we have the ability, and one of the things I did not mention, you have the ability to change the weight on that busy calling number screen or calling number screen. You can change the weights in the same way. But this is a way to go in, and the first thing you would do, you would set your home country. And if I search this, it's going to show my home country is the US, good old US of A. And you can change this by downloading that CSV file into a CSV and re-uploading it. But the actual fraud countries here are listed in this table. And so if we search this one, these are the ones that are by default listed as high fraud. So any calls that are generated into this, into these areas would be flagged and show up in that chart or that dashboard. And again, you can download this. You can, export this to a table. You can edit this. You can change them. You can remove them. You can add new countries. So if you've got a particular problem country that you're dealing with, and you want to keep an eye on that, you can easily add that to the list. Let's see. Any questions so far, guys? If there are, feel free to raise your hand, ask a question. Yim and I, either one of us, will try to get back to you before I move on into incident detectors and such. Don't see any coming in yet. Okay. All right. So let's talk about incident detectors. So again, we talked about, oh, there's a question. Yeah,
so
go ahead.
you want to save that to the end, John, or you want
Yeah,
to?
we can save that one. We can save that one to the
Okay,
end, unless
great.
again you want to type up in the Q&A there, and then we can address it to everyone.
Yeah, Guillaume, go ahead and take a look at that, and we can also, state that out loud once we get to the end. Go ahead, John.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Lance. Okay, so incident detectors. We already kind of covered this, but again, an incident detector is set up to detect some threshold or something happening on the network that you want to be notified about. And so there's some by default that we've got running here. And what I want to show you is there's one called first line calling with high volume, or first line, fraud observer calling with high volume. And what this does is, if we look at this particular rule, this rule is set up. It's a rule-based incident detector, and it's running on this KPI set, which is running by default out there. The time group is all times. We're doing over a 5-minute interval, and then we're looking at calling number normalized, and then we're saying here the rule definition is anytime the total count for a number is greater than or equal to 250 in that 5-minute intervals, we want to raise an incident. And so you can build a new detector here, very easily as well, based on whatever your parameters are, your requirements are. Let me start this guy back before I forget. We'll start this up. So we've got this one running. So we'll go look at the actual incidents now. Let's see, incidents. And let's look over here at incident detector. And we can see that we've got some high calling numbers by volume listed here. And if we go in and look, we can see that this has been tripped, multiple times. You can see that, you know, this particular incident was tripped with 532 calls. We can go in and look at, you can tag these with notes, as you know, as you guys know. So say, hey, I'm looking at this or what have you. Of course, us being funny, Rich, our product guy, was here, and so was I. You can come in and actually look at these. And let's see, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. You can actually look at the CDRs around this as well. Should be able to. Take that back. Something's not happening here. Well, nonetheless, but you can see you've got incidents that are being tripped with this. I'm not sure why that's not showing. Again, what am I missing here?
Sorry, you wanted to, so you're saying like the total count, the actual value was 368, which is
I was trying to drill into it and see the actual. Oh, sorry, there it is. This is a call. This yeah, space there for a second. So we've got this calling, this number that's calling, and it had a total count of 368. So it crossed the threshold at this time. So again, incident detectors can be set up. You know, here's some that are for, you know, one of the other incidents that were set up. So this was a high calling number distribution. You know, so that these are other incidents that were triggered that were set up automatically in the system or set up in the system, and so on and so forth. One last thing that we can talk about here is how would you report on this? How would you report, you know, send regular reports? So if we look at our reporting dashboards or our reporting, one that's built, for instance, that I just built as a test. Let's see here. Is you can do this by, you know, ad hoc, or you can set it to run on a schedule if you want to run it on a schedule. But basically, I just, you know, we could call it user group test. And basically, I picked security applications, and I said, okay, I want to generate, maybe you want a report that comes to you every morning for the busiest calling numbers, or you want a report that comes to you for the high fraud countries that were called, just so that you know, hey, am I getting any, and are they? Is this something I need to look at? So you basically come in, and then you can say, you know, we want to look at security applications. So you can either send a link, you can send a PNG, you can send the raw data. I just said send a PNG, and then you can, you know, pick what you want to look at. You know, pick which one you want to drill down into in here. And so I just said the busiest calling numbers, and you could send more than one, of course, and you could call it, you know, fraud observer daily report or whatever you wanted to do, and then apply that, and then, you know, it would run on whatever schedule you set up, and you should have that in your inbox, you know, each morning to come in and take a look at. Any questions, guys? You know, again, it seems like a simple application, but once you start drilling into it and looking at it, it can get it can do some very interesting things. And there are other dashboards and charts. As you can see, there's number classification, there's trunk groups, the number classification. I don't have that one running per se here, but you can see what this guy will show you. will show you different classifications. It will show you, you know, various informations around that. And again, the way you would get to that, again, we don't have any data in this one, but under Fraud Observer, you would come down here to number classification. And then you got called and calling number classification. And then of course you would, this is boring because there's nothing there, but you would see that information in the system. Questions, guys? Again, you know, kind of to wrap up here, is, you know, Fraud Observer is an extra level of fraud detection. It does not require a learning and training period like some of our behavioral analytics pieces do. It is something that if you have FraudProtect today, you can set it up on your system, add it in, and if you can't, you know, if you guys can't find that application, look at the software download request and go look at that list. It should be listed as Fraud Observer. I don't remember the exact file name. But your account team can, if you can't find it, reach out to them and they can get with us and we can help you get that located. But once you get that loaded, then you should have those dashboards already populated and you can start looking at those. And I think it will, you know, give you yet another view into the network and kind of with some of the things that are going on a day-to-day basis.
Hey, John, well, we did have a couple of questions, so whenever you let me know, we can go over those. So once you're finished,
let's go over those. Let's go over those.
Well, one of them came through, and I believe we answered this in the chat feature, but we'll just state it here for the record. How do we handle analytics that support multiple home countries? And the answer there is, you know, the home country list specifies one or more countries that are considered in the home area.
Yeah,
for called numbers. So go ahead and add to whatever you'd like there, John.
Yeah, so what I think, again, where you were headed with this is under Data Manager. If we look at this guy and we go to the home country list, and right now we should just have the one in there. If you edit this, export this CSV, and edit that file and re-upload it, you can put more than one home country in the list.
And so this is Guillaume speaking. One of the things that we will be adding as part of a 2212 load, which will be coming in December, would be the ability to edit directly without having to download the file as a CSV. So you will be able to just add new rows or change existing rows, delete rows.
Perfect, Guillaume. Jason, did that let us know if that didn't answer your question?
Yeah. Jason has another one here. I'm gonna go ahead and ask it. He has multiple visuals in the dashboard. You know, is there a way to send a report in raw data format of a specific visual of that dashboard? And if you need to reread that, you can see it there in the questions thing, John. But
so let's go.
So I think there are, so exporting raw data is always like a challenge, in a sense, like if you're just looking at a chart in a dashboard is, it's a raw data. So you have a chart, which is a raw data. Okay.
So I think what you're asking for here is potentially this.
Well, I'm not sure, John. I think it's more or less when you're creating a chart, which is a raw data chart, do we have the capability of adding it? So usually for me is like when I'm trying to use raw data, I usually create more or less a KPI set and using the report manager to send the report as a CSV file to an external server.
Mm-hmm.
Versus using the dashboard report. So it is a little bit different. Maybe we should take this one offline because raw data format. Yes, so you can export the raw data from as John was showing it. It's always the problem with this export of raw data is like it is going to be a lot of data, right? If you're just thinking about if you're building a visual on CDRs, it's like, and with a grouping, it's extremely costly for the system to do this export of raw data. Right now, I believe in the report manager, we do have a timer, and if I'm not mistaken, it's after if the report takes more than 2 minutes to generate, the reports will not be generated. So there are some limitation, and it is really attached to the number of rows that needs to be returned from the database. Hopefully, I answered the question.
Okay. Good
Jason,
deal, yeah.
did that help?
And Jason, you can unmute if you want to. I think you're self-muted. I believe I've unmuted you, but
yeah, it did. Thanks.
Yeah, we hear you now.
okay, so we're good there. I think there's just like maybe two more here. Dashboards show top 20 calling numbers. Can you change that? Change the limit to show more calling numbers?
Yes, we can change. So all the dashboards are user configurable. So you can, if you want more than 20 calling numbers, if you can just change like the limit in the dashboards. So everything on the dashboard side is totally configurable by the end user.
So you're talking, for instance, get this loaded up here.
Yeah, take the first one exactly. No, it's on the second. It's the second icon. This one.
So
the limit is 15. Right?
Yeah, the limit's 15. So you could change that to. Of course, your graph's going to get. Your graph will get somewhat jumbled depending on how much you have. But there's an example.
Good deal. Okay, and I don't think this one was answered, so I'm just going to state it. Can we directly edit the tables using the user interface, or do we need to download the CSV first?
Right now, we need to download the CSV, but as I said just before, like we are adding this functionality in 22.12 to be able to edit the table directly on the UI.
And 22.12. Yeah, 22.12, guys, is, most of you know this, but that'll be the release that's planned for December. So it's the year is 22, and then 12 is the month.
Great. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I don't see any other hands raised or anything coming from the attendees record there. So John, just kind of back to you to any kind of final wrap up, and then
yeah, no, guys, I appreciate the time. I know a lot of these, there's a lot of information sometimes to digest, but go to that link that I provided. This is where you can start, and this deck can be made available, right, Lance? So you guys can go to this link, and then if you've got questions, feel free to reach out to the account teams. They can pull in the appropriate resources. Here's a link to brochures and other things that are on our websites that you can also peruse and look at. Again, we were working about, with FraudProtect and things under FraudProtect today. This is particularly called Fraud Observer.